Hey everyone! Today's story is about a noble girl who was betrayed by her own family and executed alongside her little brother. But instead of dying, she suddenly wakes up 5 years in the past. Now, with a second chance at life, she will do whatever it takes to change her fate and protect her brother. So with that said, let's begin the story. There are two people on the scaffold, a boy and a girl. The young man has already laid his head on the block, humbly closing his eyes. The girl is kneeling next to him, calling his name. But Florenci does not have time to answer her before a heavy sword falls on his neck. The last condemned woman, with tears in her eyes and a doomed smile, looks at a small, round, and fluffy creature named Gakken, asking for forgiveness for not having a time to tell him much before sharing the boy's fate. On her 25th birthday, the girl was executed in the town square. Graciella feels herself falling into a void, thinking that sinners go to hell and suffer in eternal fire. Her hand touches a thin thread that stretches out to her. Suddenly, the young lady hears a familiar sound that brings her out of her heavy sleep. Opening her eyes, she discovers Gakken, the spider fairy who has always been by her side for as long as she can remember, jumping on her chest. Graciella gets up and looks around, discovering that she is in her room in her old, beloved home, where she was forbidden to return 5 years ago. The girl is surprised, not understanding what is happening, because she expected to see hell. Gakken squeaks to get her owner's attention and hands her a mirror, though it's really hard for her to hold it. Her initial surprise turns to shock when the former criminal looks at her reflection and asks her little companion what happened to her. And what kind of mirror is this? For a second, the girl wonders when she last looked at herself. But the main thing for her remains: how could this have happened? The reason for this reaction is that the mirror now reflects the young Graciella. The young lady looks at herself in another mirror on her dressing table, and then at the date. It was 1880 according to the sacred calendar, the second week of the month of Unity, the day of the Firebird. That is, 5 years before the execution. This meant that the noblewoman was 20 years old again and that her father would die in 2 months. Only then did she realize that she had returned to the past. The heiress of the Mendoza family realized that in that case, her brother Florenci had also traveled with her. Dropping and opening the hand mirror, the girl rushed to the boy's room. He was her younger brother, who had just been executed first, so the noblewoman still had the image of his head being severed from his body before her eyes. Bursting into her brother's room, she was relieved to find him sleeping peacefully in his bed, completely alive and unharmed. The girl even decides that it was all a dream. So she pinched her cheek, but felt nothing but pain. At that moment, she hears a moan and, turning her attention back to her brother, sees that he has woken up and asks her if she had a bad dream. He rubs his sleepy eyes as he asks. Graciella's eyes fill with tears. She begins to sob, which confuses the boy. According to the girl's recollections, the whole nightmare in their lives began with the death of their father. The doctors said his condition was stable, but he died anyway. At the funeral, Graciella and her brother stood at the head of the family's grave, immersed in mourning. A man's hand rested on the young noblewoman's shoulder. The owner of the hand expressed his condolences to her. It turned out to be her uncle Gale and his family, namely his wife Romina and daughter Sonia. Her father's brother said that Graciella needed time to recover and offered to take over the duties of the duke, for which the young lady was grateful. Her uncle prepared a secluded villa, a maid, and food for her and her brother. But after a while, she learned that the duchy had fallen into decline, which shocked the girl. So she decided it was time to get to work, and that Florenci needed to start training to become the future head of the household. One day, Graciella learned that there was no more food for them, by order of the current manager. So the lady went to her original estate, trying to figure out what this meant. After all, the future head of the house was Florenci, and Gale was only acting in that capacity. So why did the servant call him by that title? And then the man declared that the title was rightfully his. He shows a letter of appointment from the king, which meant that their uncle was not acting, but the legitimate successor. Gale took the duchy from them by force, arriving when the children were broken, wearing a mask of kindness. Graciella, without knowing it, had been dancing to his tune all this time, being too naive. The man said with a smirk that if Graciella didn't want her and her brother kicked out of the villa, she had to pay rent. The poor girl completely fell apart, sinking to the floor, trying to figure out where to find a job. She considered tutoring or being a companion to a noble lady. But for all this, she needed a letter of recommendation, and her uncle was clearly no help in this matter. Then Romina, with a friendly smile, offered Graciella the role of Sonia's personal maid, and the girl had no choice but to agree. And then every day became worse than the last. An example of her cousin's terrible behavior was when she knocked over a cup of tea, claiming that the little companion had ruined her drink. When Graciella tried to apologize and fix it, she just screamed that Gakken was disgusting, and she made Graciella clean it up. The former lady did not recognize her cousin, who had loved her. On top of that, Antony, Graciella's fiancé and her only ally, fell in love with Sonia and broke off the engagement. Graciella trusted him. He was her comfort, and now everything that happened made her feel like an idiot. And as if all this were not enough, another incident occurred. Sonia's dress arrived, but it turned out to be quite simple. This infuriated Sonia so much that the young lady pushed the maid hard, shouting that she should do whatever it took to fix it. The girl took it to the villa and asked Gakken to play his trump card. Gakken made a sound, and a magic circle appeared in front of the maid. Using her mistress's mana, Gakken could weave a magical thread, and with Graciella's imagination, it took shape. And in this way, she was able to weave the most beautiful lace in the world. She used it to decorate Sonia's dress. The dress with lace decorations caused a sensation at the evening reception, and the newly minted young duchess was pleased. From this, her mother concluded that such items could be sold well. Therefore, Gale allowed his niece to pay him not with money, but with lace. Graciella quickly agreed, deciding that then she would not have to listen to Sonia's insults and would also be able to spend more time with her brother. Unfortunately, however, her workload did not decrease. The girl wove lace until she collapsed from exhaustion. An excessive interaction with Gakken's magic had a strong effect on her body, making her look almost like an old woman. The Duke's other workers whispered among themselves, pitying her, despising her, and marveling at her. One day, Graciella came to her uncle. She asked that Florenzi be allowed to receive an education, but he only asked if she had the money for it. From this, it could be concluded that the man would not help them here either. The girl was ready to endure any humiliation and abuse from her relatives, but she did not want her brother to suffer the same fate. And yet, one day, the boy came to his sister all dirty and beaten. When his sister asked him what had happened, he burst into tears. He rushed to her, talking about his friends. Graciella realized that it was most likely their uncle who had ordered the servants' children to start teasing them. After that, she had to constantly watch over Florenzi. After all, she was the only one he could rely on, since the boy knew nothing of the outside world. But one day, when Graciella was sitting with her brother under a blanket, she quietly called him over, noticing that something was wrong. Suddenly, blood began to flow from the young man's mouth. These were the same symptoms their father had. According to the doctor, Florenzi was still young and had every chance of recovering, but his condition only worsened. As if mocking her, while his grief-stricken niece knelt by her brother's bedside, Gale came to them and said that if she had more expensive medicine, it would have an effect. So, for Florenzi's sake, the girl began to weave and weave without stopping, even when her body could no longer endure it. Everything merged into one endless stream, in which there was only lace and an all-consuming emptiness. And all for the sake of expensive medicine from her uncle. For years flew by. During this time, Graciella's mana dried up, her eyesight weakened due to excessive strain, and she could no longer weave lace. But even then, the new duke did not leave her alone, saying that even someone as useless as his niece could find work. Graciella had no choice. It was all for Florenzi. She began to carry out her uncle's orders, selling various jewelry in some strange shop and receiving money for it. All this was done suspiciously secretly, and the maid had to hide under the hood of her cloak. In the 5th year of this life, it turned out that these items belonged to the queen of the neighboring maritime kingdom of Binamir. They were considered stolen, and the unfortunate girl carried them with her without even knowing it. In the end, Graciella was blamed for everything, not Gale, and to appease the wrath of the head of Binamir, it was decided to execute her. She and Florenzi were sent to the square, where they were brutally executed. Graciella still sees the square building, the crows circling above them, and the blood on the scaffold. It all seems more like a nightmare. But now the girl is not going to brush it off. The horror and grief of Florenzi's death, the horror of how her uncle's family ruthlessly exploited them, are forever etched in her heart. So now she has no time for tears. Her father is feeling well now, but his condition could deteriorate at any moment. There is a possibility that her uncle is already preparing to seize the duchy, and she needs to check everything. Graciella almost immediately concluded that she would never forget the day of the Firebird, as it was the only morning when no eggs were served for breakfast. The butler explained that the chickens had become frightened and it had not been possible to collect the eggs. But what made this day even more memorable was the transformation of the young duchess. Now she wonders what to do next. In 2 months, her father will die, her uncle Gale will take away Florenzi's title of Duke of Mendoza, and Graciella's fiancé, Antony, will start an affair with Sonia. The girl is determined not to let this happen. She already does paperwork, but only her father can transfer the title. So first of all, she needs to discuss everything with him. Graciella also understood that after his death, she and her brother would need money. Money for Florenci's education and the main character's personal needs. These were supposed to be personal assets that had nothing to do with the duchy. As far as she remembered, her parents' funeral and the restoration of the estate were paid for with their uncle's money. But now Graciella wonders if the duchy was really in decline. After all, the Duchess herself did and continues to do her father's work, and she would be the first to know about it, although she admits that the death of her loved one has shaken her sanity. Therefore, the girl promises herself again that she will not make the same mistake twice and that her brother will live. After working with the documents, Graciella came to her father's bedroom to check on him and noticed that he looked well that day. The room was flooded with daylight streaming through the large window, and the Duke really did not look like a seriously ill man, except that he was very thin. The man smiles and suggests that in that case, he may soon recover. Graciella remembers that the butler said that her father was feeling much better today, but she is still determined to end it all before he gets worse. At the same time, the thought flashes through her mind that if her father were alive, this whole nightmare would never have happened. She approaches the bed, and the Duke notices that his daughter is more formal than usual and asks what is wrong. The young lady clenches her fists, telling herself that she must protect what is dear to her before her greedy relatives have a chance to take anything away. She presses her palm to her chest and replies that she has actually come with a request. That request was to transfer the Duke's title and all his assets to His Majesty the King, so that he could freeze them until Florenci came of age. Graciella understood that this was tantamount to asking her father to renounce his title, but it was necessary nonetheless, especially since family had always been the Duke's priority. He looked at his daughter with slight concern, asking why she wanted this. The girl replied that in the future she would not be able to fulfill her duties as the Duke's representative. When her father asked if it was because she wanted to marry Antony as soon as possible, Graciella stated outright that she wanted to break off the engagement. The man sits down abruptly, clutching his chest, shocked by his daughter's decision, because, in his words, Antony is an exemplary man who is worthy of becoming her husband. The girl tried to calm her father, saying that when the title of Duke and all assets were transferred to the king, there would be no need for this union. The nobleman ran his hand through his hair, saying that the groom loved her. Graciella presses her lips together, knowing full well that he loves the Duke's naive daughter. Graciella said aloud that there was no place for love in marriages between nobles, and that she herself would write a letter to Antony about breaking off the engagement and freezing all the duchy's assets. The man looks at his daughter and sighs. He says that their life without this money will become more difficult, asking if she has thought about this. The young duchess smiles in response, suggesting that they sell the gifts he gave her so that they would have enough money for a while, and when Florenci grows up, she will go to work as a tutor or maid. Her father asks again, this time about the necessity of such measures, adding that if Graciella finds it difficult to cope, his brother, her uncle, will be happy to help. The girl, of course, categorically refuses, considering such a turn of events as Gale trying to take the title of Duke for himself. The man smiles good-naturedly, saying that his brother is not that kind of person and tries to remind his daughter that he is her kind and caring uncle. But from her past life, Graciella already knows that this is just a mask that Gale puts on in front of his brother. Her father, being the heir, received everything that was best. He cannot understand the hatred felt by his uncle, who was pushed aside. The girl realizes that her arguments will not convince the Duke, so she cries, saying that her father believes her uncle more than her. But she herself can only trust her father and Florenci. The man is stunned by her sudden tears. Graciella continues, saying that since he fell ill, she has been unable to stop worrying, and now she is also concerned that someone might take the title of Duke away from their family while they are weak, turning away dramatically. Stammering, the father began to apologize to his child for putting so much on her shoulders. Graciella replied that he was not to blame for anything. After that, the Duke agreed to do as Graciella wanted, and upon hearing this, she immediately approached him, happily saying that in that case, they needed to obtain official consent from His Majesty. The man promised to write a letter to the king, and the young duchess thanked him, shedding a few more tears and turning away. But realizing that her plan to play on his pity had been successful and that the title was finally protected, Graciella quickly calmed down and smiled happily. Her father notices that she never asks for anything and doesn't cry often, so it becomes clear that this really has a big impact on the Duke. He also apologizes to his daughter again for placing such a burden on her. Graciella raises her eyebrows slightly. Turning back, she replies that she is fine. She is only concerned about Florenci's well-being. Her father lowers his head and asks about her own life. After all, he would prefer her to marry Antony and live happily ever after. Somewhere deep down, Graciela believed that marriage would bring her happiness, but in the future, it would only bring her despair. After the breakup of the engagement, the Duke suggests that the girl find another groom. Graciela, however, has no intention of getting married or seeking her own happiness. Her father tried to change her mind, but Graciela had already decided on her role, merely a cog in the Mendoza Duchy, and she will have to work for Florenci's future. The young noblewoman understands that with her mother dead and her father bedridden, she's the only one who can protect her brother, so she confidently declares her desire to be his support. The man looks at his daughter with noticeable sadness. Then he turns away with a sigh. He begins to get out of bed and says that first he needs to write a letter to Antony. Graciela helps him, expressing her gratitude once again. The girl also asks not to make this public, as Florenci may start to worry. In fact, she realizes that her uncle will be furious if he finds out about the transfer of the title to the king, and they don't need any extra problems right now. The Duke mentions that the young lady's soon-to-be ex-fiancé will have to be compensated for the breakup of the engagement. Graciela begins to consult with her father about the servants, and he says that they will have to be dismissed, citing his illness as the reason, and find them work in the palace. The girl supports this idea, and, in the opinion of the head of the household, reducing the number of servants is a good reason to spend time in the fresh air. He also asks what Graciela herself will do. She turns around and walks slowly, thinking. The lady understood that in order for Florenci to receive a decent education, they needed to stay in the capital, but at the same time, the further they were from the capital, the less threat there would be from her uncle. Therefore, she cannot give her father an answer right now, promising to think about it. Soon, the head of the Mendoza family sent Antony a letter terminating the engagement and immediately dismissed most of the servants. Graciela herself helped those who remained, giving them not so much work, such as just cleaning her brother's room. The cook only worked in the evenings, so the Duchess also took care of breakfast and lunch. On the very first day, she prepared a 3-course lunch consisting of chicken broth with roasted carrots and ginger, baked turnip stuffed with meat and cheese, pasta, and seafood ragu. The girl admitted to herself that it might not be as tasty as what Florenci had eaten before, but now he would have to eat her cooking. It was good that she still had the skills from her past life. After tasting what his sister had cooked, Florenci gave the food a positive review. It was warm and soft. Hearing this, Graciela beamed, thanking her brother for his praise. Several days passed. The girl hurried to her bedroom. At that moment, Gakin was sleeping peacefully in her bed when she was awakened by her mistress. She was almost glowing. She was holding a letter in her hands, saying that they had done it after all. Namely, the title of Duke and all assets were now frozen. His Majesty had given his consent. Gakin immediately jumped up to her mistress, made a sound, and pressed herself against her cheek. Now her uncle would not be able to take their property, and even though Graciela had died, she had been given a second chance. Gakin began to rub happily against the girl's cheek, before she looked at her eternal companion, asking if she had turned back time. The creature only made a questioning sound. Graciela swore again that whoever had given her this life, she would not repeat the mistakes of the past. Now she is not alone, because she has Gakin, Florenci, and their father is still alive. All that remains is to make an effort and avoid a terrible future. Then the young lady will surely live a long second life. Graciela is thoughtfully looking at the dress on the mannequin when she hears a knock at the door. She turned around and answered so that the person knocking could come in. It was her father, wrapped in a blanket. He informed her that Antony had agreed to break off the engagement, to which the girl feigned surprise. The Duke added that the young man had also filed a lawsuit for additional compensation, which greatly upset him, as he did not expect the failed groom to be one of those who would not miss an opportunity to make extra money. The young noblewoman covered her mouth with her hand, saying that this was unexpected, while pretending to be sad. But in fact, there was nothing unexpected for her in this, because there had never been any love between them. She quickly turned away from her father. Even though everything was going exactly as she had expected, she felt somehow uneasy. Her father immediately approached his daughter and put his hand on her shoulder, saying that it was not her fault. And does she understand that? Turning to him with a smile, the young lady replied that yes, she knew. But the Duke also mentioned that journalists had somehow found out about the breakup of the engagement and had already come to them, so it would be better for Graciela to stay in her room for a while. The girl replied that in that case, she would go to the ball that evening, clenching her hands into fists unnoticed. The man was shocked by his daughter's desire, but she cut him off, saying that they had to show the public that she was not suffering from grief, but was quite happy and feeling wonderful. That she was not suffering from grief, but was quite happy and feeling wonderful. At the same time, Graciela took his hand and pressed it to her chest. The Duke tried to dissuade her, saying that she had only broken off her engagement today and should not trouble herself by going to the ball. Graciela herself thought so too, but she couldn't show her weakness to those around her. After all, she couldn't hide forever, and she had to be strong. The girl squeezes her father's hand, and he takes her hands in his. He asks his daughter not to overexert herself. She smiled in agreement. When the Duke left, Graciela turned her attention back to the dress, remembering why she had chosen it. The dress had no decorations, no ribbons. It was completely simple. She was both the customer and the designer of this dress. Her father was ill, so Graciela ordered a modest dress from the atelier. If she had a fiancé, no one would have found fault with such an outfit. But now, after the breakup of the engagement, any mistake could make her a laughing stock, and that could not be allowed. The Duke's daughter was deep in thought when suddenly Gakken caught the hostess's attention, sitting on her shoulder. The girl guessed that Gakken was offering to weave lace to decorate the dress, and the creature agreed. Graciela liked the idea. In her past life, she had come up with the idea of using lace to decorate a simple dress, which led to her sad end. She wonders if Gakken remembers that time. After all, it was most likely Gakken who brought her back to the past. Graciela quickly dismisses these thoughts, because now she needs to think about her own dress, which makes Gakken utter a questioning sound. Graciela presses the creature to her cheek. In her past life, all her lace went to stores, and now, for the first time, she will be weaving for herself, so she admits to feeling excited. The girl collects her thoughts, suggests starting, and, receiving the approval of her little companion, tells Gakken to weave. She tells Gakken to weave. A magic circle appears in front of Mendoza, from which threads and lace-like ribbons extend. Making sounds, Gakken produced a thin thread from which the lace was woven. As a result, with the help of this and a needle, her dress is now decorated with beautiful rose patterns. Graciela happily announced that they had done it. But suddenly Gakken became worried, making a sound again. The girl realized that she was worried about using too much mana. But she reassures Gakken, saying that it's no big deal, because the Mendoza family has the blood of magicians running through their veins. Hearing this, Gakken exhales with relief. Graciela thanks her, because with Gakken's help, she was able to make a beautiful dress, which she now needs to show to Florenzi. In response, the creature makes a melodious sound. She put on the dress and went to her brother. The boy was delighted by what he saw and said that his little sister was very beautiful, like a real princess. Graciela was embarrassed because she didn't think he would like it so much. This makes the young lady think that she should pay more attention to her appearance in the future. And then the young man says something about how lucky his brother-in-law is to have her. Graciela looks at her brother with a slightly sad expression. The boy couldn't help but notice, so he asked if they had quarreled with Antony. The girl folds her arms, saying that nothing of the sort has happened. But she admits that she broke off her engagement to him. Florenzi lowers his head, understanding the situation, and apologizing for not knowing. Graciela hugs her brother, pressing him to her chest. She knew perfectly well that the future little duke was a taciturn and strong boy, so she should have told him everything right away, rather than worrying that it would upset him. Florenzi quickly cheered up and noticed that in that case, his sister would go with Gakken, who happened to be in the arms of the hostess. Still slightly nervous, the girl confirmed this and praised her brother for his observation. Graciela also said that Gakken had helped her with her dress, done her makeup with a brush made of magical thread, and done her hair at the same time. Gakken was a veritable treasure trove of talents. This again amazed the boy. He put Gakken on his hand, asking her to take care of his little sister. The creature agreed. Florenzi asks his sister to have fun at the ball, and she thanks him. After putting him to bed, the Duchess left the house and took a carriage to the castle. Night had already fallen, and the city streets were almost empty. Soon she arrived at her destination and got out of the carriage, wrapped in a cloak with a fur collar. It was the same place. Passing by one of the trees, she looked at the flowers at its roots, which brought back memories. If Antony had at least tried to talk to her, the girl might have apologized, but in the end, he was only interested in money. She climbed the steps and entered the room, from which warm light spilled out. There were quite a few people in the banquet hall. Conversations could be heard, and many had partners with whom they had arrived. The overall atmosphere was more oppressive than she had expected. People usually go to such balls with partners. Simply put, if you come alone, there must be a reason. And judging by the numerous glances and whispers, rumors of Graciela's broken engagement had already spread. Then someone called out to the girl. Turning around, she saw her cousin Sonia holding Antony's arm. While the former radiated ease and love, her companion was visibly nervous. In any case, this was a real problem for Graciela. But then she thought that not even a day had passed since the breakup, and no matter how you looked at it, it was too early to start a new relationship. But it was better for her this way, so there was no point in worrying. The girl decides to use their stupidity against them. She approaches them, putting on a sad face and feigning surprise that her ex-fiancé has come with a relative. She cautiously reaches out to the young man while he tries to respond clearly. But Sonia pushes her away. With a mocking look, she declares that no matter how sad Graciela may be right now, she must control herself. These words thunder through the hall, drawing the attention of everyone present to the unfolding scene. The young lady pulls her hand away and agrees, thanking her cousin. At the same time, a tear rolls down her cheek. She wipes it away with the sleeve of her dress, wishing the new couple happiness and deciding to leave. Immediately after the girl left, the other guests at the ball began talking among themselves, discussing what had happened. But everyone came to the same conclusion. Graciela was not to blame, and everyone felt very sorry for her. Walking through the empty corridors, the Duchess rejoiced. After all, she had played her part perfectly. Now people would blame Antony for breaking off the engagement. All that remained was to wait for the rumors to spread. The girl went out into the garden, strolling along the wide tiled paths. She decided to stay with Gakken, who had been pretending to be a brooch on her mistress's chest all this time, in the garden while a heated discussion was going on in the hall. Besides, there were very beautiful roses there. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night's silence. Almost immediately, it happened again. A bead rolled to Graciela's feet. She gasped, lifting her dress and looking at the pearl. At that moment, a girl nearby knelt down, trying to gather a scattering of similar beads, while a slightly older woman, obviously her companion, helped her. Graciela saw them and almost immediately assumed that they were foreign guests, while they tried to figure out if they had collected everything. Then Gakken jumped onto her mistress's shoulder, holding a pearl in her little paws. The Duke's daughter carefully took the find, after hearing the guest tell her companion that one bead was missing. Despite her reluctance to get involved in other people's business, Graciela still went out to the strangers. She asked if the pearl belonged to them. The girl immediately recognized part of her jewelry. She handed it to her companion, asking her to hold it. Watching this, Graciela asked what had happened. The stranger complained that her necklace had gotten caught on a rose bush. Her fiancé had given it to her, and she hadn't even had a chance to show it to him. She also asks if the Duchess knows any experienced jewelers. But her companion reminds the young lady that the repair will take a long time, which upsets the guest even more. Then Gakken, who had hidden back in her mistress's brooch, began to make noises, reminding her of her presence, which gave the girl the idea to use Gakken's power. Therefore, she confidently declares that she can repair the necklace. This amazes the stranger. But then Graciela corrects herself, saying that her fairy will do it. Seeing the small fluffy creature on her companion's chest, the guest is delighted that fairies still exist in the land of volcanoes. In Volcano, where the Mendoza family lives, there are many volcanoes as the name suggests, and as the lady explains, the cores of volcanoes are natural sources of mana. Therefore, fairies, who cannot live without it, really like it here. 2 centuries ago, a magical war took place, weakening the world tree, the source of all mana. As a result, the number of such magical creatures has decreased. The stranger sighs, saying that fairies are considered extinct in the land of seas, and these words confirm Graciela's guess that she is a foreigner. Bynamir, the country known as the land of seas, is located on the other side of the water for Volcano. They have a well-developed military, a warm climate, and many fertile territories. The guest decides to ask how Graciela met her fairies, and she, placing Gakken on her finger and causing even greater delight with its fluffy appearance. She says she met them when she was just a child. She found a weakened fairy near some flower beds and shared her mana with it. In response, the creature wanted to make a contract with the little Duchess, wishing to stay with her forever. The stranger smiles happily, touched by the story, and says that the fairy is Graciela's best friend. The girl is silent for a few seconds, slightly surprised. Then she smiles back, confirming her companion's words. But she quickly changes the subject, because now is not the time to talk about the past, and it's time to use the fairy's power. After receiving permission from the owner of the necklace, Graciela tells Gakken that she is counting on this as the beads on the path rise into the air inside the magical glowing circle. The creature made a sound, and while it continued to make these sounds, the magic thread gathered the pearls right on the foreigner's neck, very quickly restoring it to its former appearance. The guest was amazed at the speed of the repair, looking at the now complete piece of jewelry. She thanked Graciela and asked how she could repay her savior. And then she remembered that she had forgotten to introduce herself. Curtsying, she said that her name was Rachel and that she was the daughter of the Grand Duke Irhalt. Hearing this, Graciela was very surprised, because Duke Irhalt was related by blood to the royal family of Bynamir. At the same time, Lady Rachel was famous for her gentle character. She was almost like a saint. Understanding the circumstances, Graciela also introduced herself, because her new acquaintance was almost a member of the royal family, and she could not show disrespect. Rachel immediately said that she owed Graciela a debt of gratitude. She dismissed the lady's attempt to downplay the significance of her help. Rachel's companion smiled and handed the girl a stack of paper tied with a ribbon. Rachel explained that this paper was bird magic. All you had to do was write the address and name of the recipient on the paper, and the letter would fly to its destination. Graciela was very surprised to see such a thing, as the magical war had affected not only the world tree, but also the magicians. Therefore, spells and magical items were very valuable. Rachel adds that if her new friend wants to visit Binamir, she will be happy to give her a tour, and she can write to her at any time. Rachel promises to help with any other requests as well. Graciela is embarrassed and tries to refuse, and she asks if the young lady is sure she wants to give her something so valuable. The girl simply agrees. Then Rachel's companion reminds her that it's time to go. As she leaves, Rachel expresses her hope to meet her benefactor again. Left alone, Graciela realizes that everything that has happened to her now, namely meeting the Grand Duke's daughter and receiving the enchanted paper as a gift, is something she could only have dreamed of in her past life. So this paper must be guarded like the apple of her eye. The girl does not forget about her fairy, affectionately calling her best friend, to which the fairy responds with a sound. After that, Graciela decides to return to the hall, where everything should have calmed down. But before she could open the door, she immediately ran into Antony and Sonia, who immediately said that she had already thought that her cousin had run away home. Graciela replied that she had just decided to get some fresh air. Sonia, still mocking her, asks if her companion's ex-fiancé would like to join the dancers, even offering to lend him to her. Graciela was not too surprised that her cousin was waiting for her at the garden door just to say this. It only confirmed that she really did have a nasty character. Naturally, the Duke's daughter preferred to refrain from such an offer. Immediately asked why she came to the ball at all, Graciela frowned, looked at the floor, and clenched the hem of her dress with her fingers. She came because she wanted to, because if she hadn't, the couple would surely have spread a bunch of nasty rumors about her. But of course, she couldn't talk about that. Sonia continued to ask inappropriate questions about the point of coming to the ball and not dancing, about her appearance, pointing out that her cousin seemed to have aged a little. Such words again caused excitement and discussion among the ball guests. Unwittingly, Graciela, who once again found herself at the center of the discussion, thought that if this were a novel, the main character would have already come to the heroine's rescue. But this is real life, and there will be no hero to solve all the problems. And even if there was still a chance that he would fall in love with someone else. Anyway, Graciela no longer believed that love could keep someone from leaving. In his past life, Antony had not only had an affair with Sonia, he had had other women and even a child out of wedlock. In this life, it's the same. She lowers her head. The girl tells Sonia that her companion is obviously bored and that she'd better dance with him. She agrees, but asks what the lady will do alone. Graciela replies that she will return home, since it is already late and the child may start to get worried. Then she turns to Antony and asks if he thinks so too. The confused young man exclaims, surprised that his conversation partner also has a child, and quite loudly. But Graciela only reminds him of her 6-year-old brother. The former fiancé immediately turned his new lover around and led her away to dance, while she tried in vain to understand what had happened. As she left, the Duke's daughter could hear quiet words of condemnation directed at Antony. She was sure that this would be enough to start spreading rumors. The girl clenched her hands into fists, firmly deciding that since this was her life, she could not rely on others. She would build her future with her own hands. Just as Graciela put on her cloak and went out into the hall, her butler ran up to her, excitedly saying that they needed to return to the estate urgently, as something had happened to the master. When she got home, Graciela rushed into her dad's bedroom. The Duke still had a few days to live, so the young lady didn't get why this was happening now. The man was clearly suffocating, and when he saw his daughter, he tried to calm her down, but suddenly coughed and fell forward. The girl managed to run closer, and her parent fell onto her shoulder, staining her dress with blood. Graciela gently said that she was there, trying to support the Duke. He had been vomiting blood all night, and by morning he breathed his last breath. All this time, his daughter sat by his bedside. Graciela remembered that in her past life, her father had not suffered so much before his death, so she did not know why it was different now. The only comforting thing was that his face now looked peaceful. The lady regretted going to the ball instead of staying with her father. She clutched the hem of her dress. Even though this was the second time she had experienced the death of her last parent, it was clearly impossible to get used to it. The butler approached and said that they would have everything ready for the funeral in 3 days. Graciela replied that she would tell Florenzi everything herself and sent the servant to rest, as he was clearly tired too. Left alone, the girl, with tears in her eyes, began to think about what to do now. The title of Duke and his finances were under the king's control, so there was no need to worry about that. But sooner or later, their uncle would find out about it, and he might fly into a rage and try to do something. Would Florenzi be safe then? These thoughts made Graciela panic, realizing that Gale could do anything absurd, even decide to get rid of her brother to get the title. This meant that they couldn't stay here. But the problem was that Graciela had no idea where she and her brother could hide. Then Gakken appeared from somewhere, dragging a stack of enchanted paper behind her and calling for her mistress. The girl got the hint, remembering Lady Rachel, who could help. It was not for nothing that she was called Saint Binamir. She had boundless compassion and was ready to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. And even though Graciela wasn't entirely sure that this was the right thing to do, if it would help Florenzi, she was ready. The lady began to reason that simply running away to Binamir was not enough. They needed to carefully cover their tracks so that they would not be found. The uncle would quickly find his sister and brother from the ducal house, but a woman and a child would be more inconspicuous. And in principle, she did not mind playing the role of Florenzi's mother. Gakken made sound again, supporting her mistress, and Graciela herself liked the idea, because no one would pay much attention to a mother and son heading to Binamir. She also decided to tell everyone that she was 25, as no one would believe that she had a 6-year-old son at her real age. The noblewoman pressed her palm to her face. Sonia said she looked old, and that might help. Besides, Antony was already a father himself, so why was Graciela any worse? Filled with determination once again, she looks up at their family portrait, promising her late father that she will protect her brother, and to use her knowledge of the future so that they could survive and ensure a bright future for Florenzi. She didn't want to lose her family again. As darkness fell, Graciela wrote a note to the butler, warning him that she would be out for a short while and that if she did not return by noon, he should report her missing to the city guard. She figured it wouldn't hurt. No one would worry if her disappearance was noticed, and it wouldn't hurt to have a backup plan. Putting on a long hooded cloak, the girl went out through the back door. Such caution was necessary, especially if Gale already knew about his brother's death. First, they needed new passports so they could avoid unnecessary questioning. Moving through the dark, narrow streets, she had already thought up a story that they were supposedly running away from a despotic, aristocratic husband. The girl reached the door at the end of the cul-de-sac and knocked. She opened it slightly and peered inside. Behind the counter at the back of the room, cluttered with various cabinets, boxes, and other items, stood a salesman. He was a man with an eye patch. He uttered only a few words that sounded like a name, namely Campoda. Graciela replied, Florenzi. It was the password needed to conduct transactions. The salesman leaned on the counter as the visitor approached, asking what she wanted. Graciela noticed to herself that he had changed in 5 years. She had come to Forbidden Fruit, a shop where you could find anything. It was here that she had sold Queen Binamir's stolen jewelry in her previous life, on her uncle's orders. They even sold stolen goods, so it wasn't the safest place. However, oddly enough, for purposes such as Graciela's, it was the most reliable. The girl immediately asked for 2 passports. The man began to ask about her purpose and what kind of passport she needed. She answered honestly that she was planning to flee to Binamir and needed the passports of a mother and son from an aristocratic family. The salesman took out 2 passports and slid one of them open toward the buyer. She said that they had been sold to her to pay off her husband's debts. The girl learned the family name, knowing that it was a very sad story. She asked why there are no names in the documents. The seller explains that this is so that they can be sold to other people and any names can be entered. Graciela bites her lower lip, thinking, but she doesn't think for long, soon placing a bag of coins on the counter, which, according to the merchant, is enough. He takes a pen and asks what names to write down. The girl thinks that if she leaves their names, it will be easier for her uncle to find them, but still, it is somehow sad to part with her name. The noblewoman asks for some time to think, and then Gakken makes her usual sound, peeking out from under her mistress's hood. This is the sound she always uses to call her companion. It sounds similar to Graciela's affectionate nickname, Lala. The count's daughter agrees with the fairy, asking to be registered as Lala. The fairy also suggested a name for her brother, Run. When the deal was done, the girl left the shop, returning by the same narrow alley. The sky had already brightened. It was early morning when she returned home. The butler greeted her. He informed her that the young master had awakened. Taking off her cloak, the girl immediately rushed into her brother's room. She didn't even have time to enter and say anything. He interrupted her, demanding an explanation of what was going on, frowning and clutching the edge of his nightshirt. Graciela kneels before him and asks him to listen to her carefully. The lady took her brother's hands in hers and stated bluntly that their father had taken a turn for the worse during the night. The boy's eyes widened and his face darkened. Tears welled up in his eyes and rolled down his cheeks. According to him, the doctor had said that his father was getting better, which made the news even more terrifying. The boy begins to cry uncontrollably, throwing himself into his sister's arms. Tears welled up in Graciela's eyes, too. They should have had a little more time, and the girl herself found it hard to believe. But despite all the pain, she still had to protect Florenzi. That same morning, Uncle Gale's family appeared at the door. But on Graciela's orders, they waited at the entrance, while the girl herself was already ready. The butler informed his mistress that the order had been carried out. The young noblewoman replied that she would be there soon. In her first life, she was grateful to her uncle for taking charge of the funeral in the duchy, and she trusted him completely. At that time, Graciela had no idea that this was the beginning of the end and that she had fallen into a cleverly laid trap. But now she was different. So she got up and went out to her relatives, stopping at the top of the large staircase in the middle of the hall. They immediately began complaining about the butler who had kept them waiting, about the cold, demanding to be taken to a room with a fireplace. But Graciela refused, asking them to leave the mansion today. Gale was indignant. What was his niece talking about? They had come to help. But the noblewoman simply replied that she did not need their help. This surprised the man even more. He tried to pressure and humiliate the girl, saying that such a young lady could not handle organizing a funeral. But she countered again, saying that she would do everything perfectly. He tried once more to convince her that she was just upset about her father's death and that she should stop acting so confident. And again, after being refused, Gale headed for the stairs with the intention of reasoning with his niece. Graciela tensed up but did not move. Her uncle, rising and standing level with his relative, swung his cane at her. But the blow was deflected by an invisible barrier. The man recoiled, trying to understand what it was, and the mistress of the house replied that it was magic. Spiderweb magic brings to life the images that Graciela imagines in her head, so she can even set up barrier threads throughout the mansion. Gale was shocked that his niece could use magic, and his niece reminded him that the Mendoza ducal house was the greatest family of magicians in the country. Returning to the past, Graciela began to prepare. She already knew that there were many books on magic in the mansion's basement that she needed to study. After all, it was only in her second life that she realized how much she had missed. The girl declares that her magic will not let anyone with evil intentions toward her family pass. Gale tried to justify himself, saying that they had come to help, calling his father's daughter an ungrateful girl. She, wrapping a magical thread around her hand, replied that if that were the case, they would have offered their condolences first. Then the lady turned away, saying that she was busy organizing the funeral. But the man refuses to back down, saying that this is why he is offering to take over the case, so that the girl can mourn her father in peace. Graciela again asks her uncle to leave, but this time, she uses the threads to wrap around his legs and arms, pushing him toward the exit. He tried to stop his niece, but the mistress of the house, with the help of puppet magic and Gakken, easily escorted her relatives off the estate, and she slammed the door shut. Finally, she was left alone. The girl fell to her knees, exhaling and saying that she had done well. Sitting down, she smiled quietly, then turned to Gakken on her shoulder, thanking her for tying it tightly. Despite her smile, Graciela was clearly nervous. Today she managed to chase away her uncle and his family, which was a big step forward for her. But it was too early to rejoice. Gale clearly wasn't going to let it go so easily, so she had to be prepared for him to pull something else. She had already planned for the funeral preparations to begin the next day, with the funeral itself taking place 2 days later in the morning. She was going to leave the day after the funeral. With these thoughts in mind, the girl quietly knocked on her brother's door. Opening the door slightly, she found Florenzi sitting on the sofa, clutching his shirt, his eyes downcast, sad and pensive. Graciela sits down on the edge of the sofa next to him and asks him what he wants for dinner. But the boy replies that he doesn't want anything. The girl pointed out that he had to eat something to be healthy. Florenzi says he knows that, but he gets sad when he thinks about his dad. His older sister hugs her brother, saying that their father will be sad in heaven if his health deteriorates. She also tries to cheer him up by saying that she knows how hard it is, but they must keep moving forward. The boy lowers his eyes, which are already filling with tears, and says that his father is gone, just like his mother. Their mother died 2 years ago during the epidemic. She had always been in poor health and spent most of the year in a sanatorium. Florenzi has only vague memories of her, but he still cherishes them. The boy closed his eyes and began to cry, saying that they had all left him. Graciela gently turned her brother toward her and said that from now on, she would be his parent. And until he grew up, she would always be there for him. So he shouldn't be sad. The girl smiled gently at him, and the boy stopped crying, raising his eyebrows in surprise and opening his eyes wide. He asked if his sister was going to get married, to which the lady replied that she was not. Turning away, Florenzi asked if it was because she needed to take care of him. But Graciella said that for nobles, marriage was not everything. The girl understood that she couldn't tell him now that their uncle wanted to take away all their property and the title of duke. It would be better to discuss this when the boy was older. Florenzi sighed, understanding the reason for his sister's choice. He was at an age when he needed parental protection and didn't have to be strong. The boy turns back to Graciella, timidly asking how she will become his parent. And the lady explains that they can move to Binamir and play the roles of mother and son. They will change their names and identities and enjoy life. The girl said that she had even come up with names for them, Lala and Rendosa. After listening to his sister's plan, Florenzi asks why they need to leave the country for that. She explained that there were too many memories of their father here, which only caused sadness, and they needed to leave this place to rest their bodies and souls. The Count's heir rose from the sofa and smiled, clarifying that if he were no longer himself, he would be able to escape his sadness. Graciella confirmed this, adding that in that case, he would be able to become a happy child, confirming her words with Gakken, who was sitting on her shoulder. Soon, 2 paper birds flew out of the mansion window. This sight surprised the noblewoman a little. In the letter, she described the situation with her father's death, her difficult circumstances, and her need for help. Still standing at the window, Graciella wondered if Lady Rachel had returned to Binamir, because if she was still in Volcano, they could talk face to face. But then she was overcome with anxiety, wondering if she was taking advantage of the saint's kindness by telling her about her father's death. After all, they were almost strangers, and such a request would be a burden. But despite this, Graciella realized the necessity of sending these letters so that she and Florenzi could survive. Graciella dipped her pen in the inkwell when the butler entered her office to inform her of a visitor's arrival. It was Lady Rachel. She apologized for her early visit, adding that she had received her letter asking for help and thought they needed to meet as soon as possible. The mistress of the mansion smiled at her guest. She began to pour tea, saying that she was not used to receiving guests. Rachel said with concern that Graciella must be having a very hard time because of her father's death and asked her not to despair. Graciella simply thanked her in response. When Graciella sat down, Rachel asked about the absence of servants, so she had to explain that they had all been dismissed. The family's assets were now frozen until her brother came of age, and they were currently living on Graciella's personal funds. This was followed by a question about the reasons for what had happened. And Graciella told Saint Binamir about her uncle's pursuit of the duchy's fortune. She explained her seemingly wild guesses by saying that after her father's death, none of her relatives had even sent a letter of condolence, as if Gale had been waiting for his brother's death to take care of the funeral and ultimately take control of the entire house. None of them knew yet about the freezing of the accounts and the title, but it was only a matter of time. Rachel listened attentively to her interlocutor. She clearly expressed sympathy, saying that they had done the right thing, and after Graciella said that it was all for her brother's sake. She noted that Gale could still cause a big scandal if everything came to light. Graciella replied that Rachel was right. Therefore, she plans to hide for a while with her brother in Binamir under the guise of mother and son. Such a bold plan surprises Rachel. Graciella adds that she had sensed danger from her uncle before. Of course, she chose not to talk about her past life, in which she and her brother were executed in his place. After hearing her new friend's whole story, Rachel understood why Graciella needed help and asked how she could help. The girl was very pleased that her guest agreed so quickly. Although, that's what St. Binamir is like, ready to help even a virtual stranger. Graciella was a little nervous because she didn't want to take advantage of her kindness. But still, apologizing for her audacity, she asked Rachel to recommend her to a house where she could get a job. Rachel thought for a moment, pressing her index finger to her cheek. But after just a second, she kindly agrees to help. Graciella asks again if the lady is sure. Not believing her luck, the foreigner replies that she herself has a small problem that the current mistress of the ducal house can solve. The girl explains that she has a grandmother who is a misanthrope. She has no close servant who could take care of her, and she has only one hobby, which is to invite a young knight for tea. Graciella is a little surprised by this circumstance, leading her to conclude that Rachel's grandmother is full of life, since she drinks tea with a young, unmarried knight. That is why Rachel wants her relative to have at least one trusted person. So she asks Graciella if she would like to be her assistant. The guest says that there is an unused annex near her grandmother's mansion, and the Mendoza children can live there. And the garden there is beautiful. Even though many young people find it boring, she likes it there. Graciella thinks about the fact that as an assistant, she will not only have to serve her mistress, but also spend practically all her time with her and carry out any task she is given. Until now, she has been able to get along with people because she is the daughter of the Duke of Mendoza, but now she has doubts about whether she will be able to make friends without this status. After thinking about it, the girl replied that it was, of course, a great honor, but she had absolutely no experience in being someone's assistant. Because of this, she was afraid of making many mistakes. But Rachel noticed how delicious the tea brewed by the hostess was, and that even her grandmother would have liked it. In addition, the girl recalled how Graciela had helped her without hesitation when her necklace broke, and she liked her new acquaintance, so her grandmother would have to like her too. Graciela was surprised by this statement and even asked her to repeat it. And when she received a positive answer, she thought about it. Becoming an assistant to a noble lady was a great honor, and a quiet place was an excellent option for Florenci. After weighing everything up, the lady confidently declared that she would not let Rachel down. This pleased Rachel and earned her gratitude. Rachel immediately decided to find out why Graciela wanted to pass off her brother as her son, because it wasn't necessary to go that far. The girl explained that a brother and sister with a large age difference would stand out and be quickly found, and the guest couldn't help but agree with her interlocutor. Rachel then asks what Graciela would do if she met a nice man who was afraid to propose because he thought she was already married, but Graciela replies that she has no plans to marry a foreigner. In her opinion, which Graciela did not voice, of course, men who are not afraid to flirt with women who are married to someone else are dangerous, so it is better for her to remain in the role of Florenci's mother. Sometimes being married even helps. Rachel looks at the tray of sweets and concludes that her friend is determined. In that case, she sees no point in delaying and immediately starts preparing, which Graciela agrees to. Towards evening, the necessary items that Rachel had suggested transferring to Bynamir in advance were loaded into the carriage. So, fortunately, they only have to carry the luggage necessary for a 3-day trip. Graciela drank tea while these discussions took place. While Gakin climbed into the sugar bowl, making a businesslike sound, she put a sugar cube in a small napkin and tied it in a knot around her neck. Her preparations made the hostess laugh. Then the girl looks at the magic circle on the other side of the tea table, which has reacted several times already today. It reacts like this to anyone who tries to enter the mansion with malicious intent. Also, according to Gakin, who went on reconnaissance, men in black were spotted nearby. Graciela was absolutely certain that this was her uncle's doing, and that he intended to interfere with the preparations for her father's funeral and possibly kidnap his nephews. The next day, at sunrise, her father's funeral was to take place. It would be a quiet ceremony for those closest to him. Her uncle would certainly not approve of this, so Graciela asked the undertaker to hold 2 ceremonies. Gale will gladly act as the main mourner, unaware that this is a fake funeral and that he and his brother will have long since left the capital. The girl looks again at the now calm magic circle, noticing that it has not yet detected her uncle's presence, so she concludes that the letter has probably not yet arrived. That morning, the noblewoman sent a letter to her relative asking him to be the main organizer of the fake funeral. Graciela also comes to the conclusion that her uncle most likely paid the people who come to the mansion to harass them. Lost in these gloomy thoughts, the girl did not notice night falling. Then the door opens and Florenci stands on the threshold, calling his sister Mom now. She corrects herself, calling the boy by his real name. Then, smiling, she corrects herself, calling him Run. She gets up from the table and approaches her brother, apologizing and saying that she is not used to it yet, and the boy, hugging a pillow, encourages her, saying that she will manage. Graciela admits to herself that, even though she suggested this game, it embarrasses her the most, but she promises Run that she will try. Then she asks what happened, and the boy replies that he wanted to know when she was going to bed, because they have to get up early tomorrow, and it's already completely dark. The girl agrees with him and suggests going to bed right now. It was the middle of the night outside. The last candle in the bedroom was extinguished, and only the pale disk of the full moon illuminated the 2 ducal children lying in each other's arms on the bed. Florenci laid his head on his sister's shoulder and fell asleep, while she gazed tenderly at her younger brother, lost in her thoughts. She thought it was quite reasonable to sleep with her younger brother, because that way she could protect him and they could better settle into their roles as mother and son. She also felt calm when she was near him, although Graciela did not rule out the possibility that she was doing this for her own peace of mind. Her gentle gaze became more sad when she realized that she would not sleep that night, because tomorrow they would say goodbye to their father. The sun, which had just risen and illuminated the roofs of the houses in the capital of Volcano with its first rays, was quickly hidden behind leaden, almost black clouds. Heavy rain began to fall. Drops pelted the new gravestone, running down the cold stone. Neither Graciella nor Florenzi paid any attention to the rain as they stood by their father's fresh grave, immersed in mourning. Looking at the final resting place of her last parent, the eldest daughter tried to cheer herself up, thinking that even if events tear her soul apart, even if she feels like she is under incessant rain, life goes on. By giving in to these emotions, a person loses themselves and becomes weak. But they must remain strong so that no one dares to take advantage of them. She promises again to protect her brother and asks her father to watch over them from heaven. Tears run down the lady's cheeks, mixing with the rainwater. When the rain stopped and the sun finally broke through the clouds, it was already high above the horizon. The Duke's children left their mansion. Florenzi took one last look at his family home. Then he ran to his sister, taking her by the hand when she called out to him. The girl carried only a small suitcase with the necessities for a 3-day trip. She and her brother were chatting casually when they went out into the city and almost immediately ran into their uncle. When he saw his niece, he immediately rushed towards her, shouting that Antony had told him about the freezing of assets and the title of Duke. Graciella tensed up, indignant that despite the money her former fiancé had been given for his silence, he had been unable to keep his mouth shut. It seemed that he didn't care about it after her father's death. She replied calmly that she knew nothing about it, and that if Gale was so interested, he could ask His Majesty. At that moment, Florenzi moved closer to his sister. Naturally, the greedy relative did not believe that his brother's eldest daughter knew nothing about it. Graciella had no choice but to use Gaken's magic again. She called him, and he emerged from under her bonnet, and threads appeared out of thin air and began to wrap around the man. As a result, he found himself tied by his hands and feet to lampposts and building walls. While her uncle was coming to his senses and trying to understand what had happened, Graciella thanked her assistant. Realizing his situation, Gale began to shout again that it was his niece's doing. But she replied with a calm smile that she didn't understand what he was talking about. The man continued, telling her not to play dumb, and that she had cast some kind of spell on the mansion to keep anyone from getting close to it. The girl explained that it was just a spell that kept ill-wishers away. Then she turned to her brother, said it was time to go, and led him away. The uncle could only watch helplessly as his nephews walked away. A little further away, there were many carriages waiting for Lady Rachel, who now called Lala over to her. Approaching her, Florenzi bowed politely, saying that it was a great honor for him to meet Rachel and introducing himself by his new name, Rindosa. The girl curtsied, also introducing herself and noting the boy's gallantry. While the brother and sister were getting into the carriage, Rachel told them that her fiancé would remain in Volcano for the time being to settle diplomatic matters, so there would be no one extra with them. Lala asked about the extra person, but their benefactor did not answer, so the girl simply thanked her for her help. Rachel accepted her thanks and added that they should relax and enjoy the ride. When the carriage turned the corner, you could see the show that was unfolding there. Gale desperately and unsuccessfully tried to free himself from the magical threads, while a crowd gathered around him. Rachel, seeing what was happening, asked what it was. Graciella, peeking out slightly from behind the curtain, suggested that it was a street performer, while hiding Florenzi completely, to which their companion sighed and remarked how noisy he was. Only then did Graciella decide to release the invisible threads, and her uncle collapsed onto the pavement. The knights immediately approached him, taking him by the arms while the man kicked, swore, and accused his niece of witchcraft. Lala watched this with a slight smile. She didn't care what Gale said, because to protect her brother, she was ready to become a witch or a villain. After a while, looking out the window, Rachel announced that they had arrived, which made Graciella very happy. They found themselves on the seashore, in a port bustling with life and circled by large white seagulls. It took about 3 hours to travel from the capital, Volcano, to this place by carriage. From here, the fugitives and their escort would have to board a ship and arrive in Binamir in 3 days. Holding her brother's hand, Graciella walked to the gangway where the inspection was taking place. The procedure went smoothly, and now they could cross the border without any problems. In Binamir, their new home, they would be able to escape the fate their uncle had prepared for them. From now on, Graciella would live as Lala Dosa and Florenzi as Rindosa. Once on board after her brother, the girl picked up Gaken, welcoming them to their new life. At that moment, Run, who was already waiting for them, looked out at the sea. He turned and rushed into the arms of his now mother. She had decided to endure everything and raise him to be a great man. After 3 days, they arrived at their destination, which made the whole family happy. Lala was also able to breathe a sigh of relief, seeing that Gaken looked healthy and was feeling well. After all, there are no fairies in Binamir, and the girl was worried that her little companion might feel unwell. But Rin didn't know about such subtleties and the older girl just told him not to pay attention. As they climbed the stairs from the pier to the embankment, where a crowd had gathered, including those who had come to meet the new arrivals, those who had come to see them off, and those who were leaving, Rachel called out to the Dosa family, calling Lala. She suggested going straight to her grandmother's house, adding that she had prepared a separate carriage for Rin. This delighted the girl. Finally, climbing to the top, she replied that they would be right there. However, when they were next to Rachel, a young man passed by, standing out from the other people on the embankment with his military uniform, but no one really noticed. In the carriage, she found herself alone with Lala. Rachel finally decided to tell a little more about her grandmother, becoming noticeably tense for the first time. Her relative is the Marquise Delma von Falkenhayn. Her companion's mother is her youngest daughter, which means, simply put, that Rachel is her granddaughter on her mother's side. Lala asks again, clearly not understanding this clarification. But the girl explains that in Bynamir, grandchildren on the son's side are more valued than those on the daughter's side. But Lala remarks to herself that her situation is not so different. Nobles there rarely take an interest in their relatives in general. So she doesn't remember her grandfather or grandmother ever caring for her in any way. Rachel continues, saying that this is just the way it is and there's nothing you can do about it. She doesn't exactly have a warm relationship with her grandmother. Lala asks if the Marquise has any grandchildren on her son's side. The young lady replies that yes, she does. Irma, the daughter of her uncle, who died when he was still very young. The girl received a special education for future brides of the royal family. She was beautiful and was raised like a real princess. She was the very embodiment of happiness. Lala couldn't help but notice that her interlocutor was using the past tense, but she received an explanation almost immediately. According to Rachel, 3 years ago, on a frosty morning, Irma died. She was 18 years old. Her body was found floating in a lake, and everyone decided it was an accident. According to the knight's investigation, the noblewoman slipped and fell into the lake, where she drowned. But Rachel herself is convinced that Irma would never have gone to the lake in the middle of winter without her maid. So the girl assumes that it was suicide. Lala decided that since she was going to serve the Marquise, she needed to find out more details, so she asked where these conclusions came from. Rachel explains that her cousin had always been very sickly and unable to have children, so perhaps she was upset that she would not be able to fulfill her duty as a wife. Her grandmother's expectations were too high, and Irma could not bear the burden. But the girl admits, pressing her finger to her lips, that she is not sure that this is the reason. In addition, after Irma's death, her grandmother became more distant. After hearing this, Lala understood why Rachel had put Run in a separate carriage. She couldn't tell him about this. Rachel continued her story about her grandmother, saying that she had distanced herself from all her loved ones, friends, even her husband, and that only a couple of maids and one cook now worked in the mansion. The problem was that the woman had a chronic illness, and because of her almost complete isolation, the Marquise spent at least one day a week in complete solitude. It was becoming dangerous. The former Lady Mendoza had already guessed the consequences, and her companion confirmed her suspicions. On one such day, the grandmother forgot to take her medication and fainted. This is why she needs an assistant. However, Rachel adds with some reluctance that Delma was saved that day by a friend she usually invites for tea, Leon von Manchefeld. He is a knight of the Royal Guard and, apparently, not suspicious. However, this still made the girl nervous and anxious. When asked how he became a regular guest of the Marquise, the Duke's daughter replied that it began after the death of Lord Manchefeld's mother, when he became the head of the house. At first, Delma drove him away, but over time she got used to his presence. She described the knight as a friendly dog, very skilled at finding the keys to people's hearts. This comparison made Graciela a little nervous, as it made her imagine a small, funny, fluffy dog. Rachel, in order to calm and convince her companion, suggested following his example to win her grandmother's heart, folding her hands in a prayerful gesture as she spoke. Then she rushed closer to Lala, excitedly explaining that the Marquise might seem cold and stubborn at first glance, but in reality, she was a very compassionate person, and if she showed patience, the woman would surely appreciate her efforts. At the last moment, the girl looked completely desperate as she looked into Graciela's eyes. Soon they arrived at a luxurious mansion located at the foot of a mountain and surrounded by trees. When the girls got out of the carriage, Rachel put her index finger to her lips, indicating that Lala should not reveal anything she had heard, so that she understood the hint. At that moment, Florenzi got out of his carriage, hugging a large teddy bear and clearly enjoying the ride. Rachel then invited her guests to follow her into the greenhouse, where her grandmother spends most of her time at this time of year. Accompanied by a maid, they entered the greenhouse, which was filled with all kinds of exotic plants. There they found the hostess herself, sitting at a tea table with a book in her hands. Rachel bowed, greeting her relative, and said that she had brought with her the girl she had written about in her letter, the one from Volcano. The Marquise, without even looking at the visitors, replied that she had also sent her a letter and did not need her help. Ignoring her grandmother, the girl pointed to Lala and Rendosa, who were also bowing politely, and introduced them. Only then did the woman look up from the pages to her guests. She paid particular attention to the boy, noting that there must be a really serious reason to travel all the way to Bynamere with the child. She made a small hint, and the maid gently led Florenci away, leaving the girls alone with Delma. She put down her book, asking what had happened to her maid candidate. Lala's face darkened. She explained that when her husband got into debt, he began to take his anger out on her and her son. If it had been just her, she would have endured it, but she couldn't stay in that house knowing that Ron was in danger. Rachel immediately intervened, saying that Lala had no relatives or friends who could protect her, and that her fate was very sad. The girl asked her grandmother to keep Lala as a servant. After all, she can't be left on the street with her little son. The Marquise tried to brush it off, saying that she herself could take care of the immigrant, but her granddaughter replied that she could not hire a servant without a letter of recommendation. That is why she is so desperate to ask her grandmother to let Lala stay. Graciela watched as Delma indifferently opened the book. She didn't think it would go this far, but the woman could clearly refuse, so it was worth a try. The Duke's daughter stepped forward to the table, clasped her hands, and pleaded with the Marquise. The latter looked up at the guest, who bowed her head humbly, waiting for an answer. She sighed and waved her hand dismissively, saying that they can do whatever they want. Both girls immediately cheer up, thanking the noblewoman for her indulgence. The Marquise, throwing a long shawl over her shoulders, repeats that she does not need an assistant. Then she gets up and leaves, asking to be left alone. As the girls walk away from the greenhouse, Rachel apologizes for her grandmother's bad mood, although she adds that she is almost always in a bad mood. Lala replies that it's okay. The main thing is that she was allowed to stay, so she will try to do everything in her power to make the Marquise accept her. In response to Rachel's gratitude, the girl says that she is the one who should be thanked for everything. Graciela notes to herself that if the Marquise really hated all people, she would have easily sent away a stranger with a child, so she is obviously a very compassionate person. The girls soon went outside, and after a while, Rachel pointed to a small house a short distance from the main mansion. Lala obviously liked the place where she and Run would be living at first sight. She remarked aloud how nice the house seemed to her, and her companion agreed. However, she decides it is necessary to tell Graciela that in his youth, her grandfather often brought his mistresses to the mansion, and her grandmother ordered this house to be built to avoid scenes of scandal and the mistresses running away. Rachel's grandfather still lives in a separate villa with his mistress and returns to the main mansion twice a month, so the new resident of the mansion can breathe a sigh of relief. Rachel informed her that her and her brother's luggage was already in the house, and the servants had cleaned it up on her orders, so they could move in immediately. She also handed the girl the keys to the new house and the mansion, adding enchanted sheets of paper and asking her to write to her if any problems arose. Finally, she asked her to take care of her grandmother, and Lala promised her with a smile that she would. After seeing off their benefactor, the Duke's runaway children begin to settle into their new home. Lala makes tea and informs Ren that her work as the Marquise's assistant will not begin until tomorrow, and that today they can relax. Florenci and Gakken agree. Graciela places a tray with tea and milk prepared for her godson on the coffee table next to the sofa where he is sitting. He remarks on how beautiful the house is, which Lala confirms, even though she thinks it is perhaps too nice. But still, watching her Gakken chew on a sugar cube, she admits that everyday magic is very convenient. The girl says that she made this tea with milk using a kettle and refrigerator powered by magic stones, and that she learned about these features of Bynamere life while still on the ship. Rin listens attentively to her mother, looking at the white tea in her cup. Artificial core stones that accumulate mana are widespread throughout Bynamere. But fairies don't like this very much, so they move to Volcano, closer to the natural core. As a result, these creatures are considered extinct in Bynamere. This makes the girl think that if she had been born in the land of the seas, she and Gakken would never have met. In the midst of these internal reflections, she asks her companion if it tastes good, to which she receives a satisfied squeak. Then she turns and asks Ren what he wants for dinner. The boy, with a serious expression, declares that he wants to try cooking with her. After all, he doesn't even know how to brew tea, and he'll go hungry even if he has the ingredients, simply because he doesn't know how to cook. Lala looked at the boy with concern, saying that he had her for that. She still considers herself just a cog in the Mendoza family. So in her opinion, Florenci doesn't necessarily need to learn how to cook. Rin justified this by saying that everyone dies someday, so he can't rely on money or other people's help all the time. That's why he wants to learn to live independently. The girl looks at her brother with some regret at how much their father's death has affected him, but she still agrees with Rin. He added that if he learned to be independent, he would definitely not die of hunger. He would be able to help his mother and those who need it more than he does. After listening, Graciela hugs her son. Initially, she planned to raise him as the true heir to the Mendoza house so that he would never know hardship, but Rin was right. They don't know what the future holds. Based on these considerations, she agrees to cook together. In the kitchen, Florenzi is immediately delighted by the ordinary tap water. The girl explained to him that in Binamir, even tap water is clean and drinkable, whereas in Volcano, it must first be boiled before consumption. They decided to cook potatoes with mushrooms and cream. Throughout the process, Rin clumsily but diligently helped his guardian with washing, cleaning, cutting, and cooking vegetables. Lala pours the finished dish into bowls, placing one of them in front of her son. He stares at the food for a couple of seconds. Then he tries it. He immediately raves about the taste. He immediately asks his mother to try it too, and she confirms that it is indeed delicious. But then Florenzi's mood changes when he realizes that Graciela did almost all the cooking, and he couldn't really help with anything. After all, while cooking, he spilled water on himself while washing potatoes, cut them very unevenly and clumsily, and also had problems during cooking. Lala replied that everyone starts out that way. The first time cooking is the first time making mistakes. Lala thought it necessary to mention that, in addition to cooking, he should learn how to wash himself, dress himself, and change his clothes. There are many skills for independent living, and only practice can develop them. After listening to his mother, Rin promises that one day he will cook for them himself. This bold statement surprised her at first, but then she wishes her foster brother luck. Only now does she realize that finding what Florenzi's heart desires is no less important than the lessons of a future duke. From now on, Graciela decides to listen more often to her son's wishes. As night falls, when the duke's children went to bed, together again, the older one looked at her brother and thought about how hard he had tried for her. She, too, must try hard and win the Marquise's approval. In the morning, Lala was busy getting ready. In Binamir, unmarried girls usually wear their hair down, while married women put their hair up in a bun. And since she was playing the role of a 25-year-old woman with a child here, she asked Gakken to do her hair with the help of magic threads. When the fairy finished, the girl praised it, noting that it was a suitable look for the Marquise's assistant. Dressed in a suitable costume, she was finally ready to go to work for the noblewoman. Florenzi gave her some training tasks to complete. Lala was worried about leaving him alone, but Gakken assured her that if he needed anything, he would let her know. Lala found no one in the mansion, although, as far as she remembered, the servant's day off was only in 3 days. Approaching the mistress's room, the girl knocked, but there was no answer. This immediately made her think that Delma had fainted, so she abruptly opened the door herself, apologizing immediately. But the bedroom was empty, the bedmaid, and her pajamas were folded on the bedspread. Lala found the Marquise in the greenhouse. She was doing the same thing she had done the day before, reading a book. The assistant greeted her. The woman merely glanced at her, confirming that the intruder into her solitude was the one Rachel had brought yesterday. The young lady agrees and introduces herself, to which the Marquise replies that she has already heard this. She then asks why Lala has come, and when the assistant clarifies that she wanted to know if her mistress needed her help, she says no. Then Graciela asked if Delma had eaten breakfast. She said she had eaten biscuits. She eats the same thing every morning, so the cook only comes for lunch. She has a teapot and makes her own tea. Therefore, she does not need the help of a new assistant. The girl tried to object, but then a man's voice was heard from behind, saying that the Marquise rarely had guests. Lala turned around, apologizing profusely, not expecting a visitor. As a noblewoman's assistant, she had to report all visitors. She stumbled upon a handsome young man who had already noticed her beauty. Lala tried to pull away, but the guy held her by the shoulders, asking her not to run away, as he wanted to take a closer look at her new face. Graciela cried out, asking him to let her go. Only now did she notice the medals and uniform of the insolent man. He was definitely a high-ranking knight, which meant he was not someone she could argue with. But then the Marquise's loud and harsh voice rang out, calling the guest by name, Leon von Manchefel. Delma rose from her seat, scolding the knight and forcing him to let go of Lala's hand. The guy obeyed, responding indignantly that the Marquise was cruel and acting as if he were some kind of scoundrel. The woman stood between him and Lala. She said that she didn't know how else to talk to a man who was standing so close to a stranger and staring at her intently. Leon asks with sincere surprise if that's not how you greet beautiful women. To which the Marquise replies irritably that it's not a greeting, it's flirting. The young man just laughs nervously. Now Lala knows Leon von Manchefel, the royal knight whom the Marquise often invites for tea, and whom she continues to scold, pointing to the new assistant's hairstyle, and only then does it dawn on the visitor that the girl is married. Delma confirms the knight's conclusion, adding that it's one thing for a man to flirt with a single woman, but to behave this way with a married woman is the height of rudeness. The Lord laughs again, saying that his tea partner speaks as if he has done something terrible. But for the Marquise, that is exactly what it is. Watching the argument unfold, Graciela finally understood what Rachel meant when she said that her grandmother's eternal guest did not seem suspicious, emphasizing the word seemed. She didn't think Lord Manchefel would turn out to be such a frivolous person. She had imagined him to be a serious and honest man, and he had no respect for the Marquise. Leon decided to end the argument by suggesting they have tea and just chat, while the woman finally said that he was acting like a child. The man picked up the teapot, saying that she had probably made terrible tea again. He tasted it and found that the drink was very bitter. Delma fell silent, though she looked very angry, almost glaring at the guy, who, on the contrary, laughed and almost glowed. Nevertheless, she sat down in her seat, saying that she always drinks bitter tea in the morning, to which the guest replied that everything should be done in moderation. Immediately, Lala, seeing an opportunity to work, approached Leon from behind. He took out his pocket watch, and she said that she would take care of the tea. But the knight sat Lala down on a chair, saying that it wasn't necessary. He brewed the tea himself in a teapot, poured it into cups, and handed one to the girl. She looked at the cup, thinking at first that she couldn't start drinking before the hostess. But then she remembered her duty to check the drinks for poison. But the tea turned out to be simply delicious, and Lala understood why the Marquise invited Lord Manchefel to her tea parties. Leon said he was glad to hear that. Then he asked to be introduced to the beautiful woman, namely the new resident of the mansion. Delma replied that her name was Lala Dosa, that Rachel had brought her there, and that she was a guest. The knight noted that the Marquise did not often allow anyone to stay in the mansion and usually sent everyone away. The hostess justified this decision by saying that after hearing Lala's story, she couldn't turn her away. Lord Manchefel asked what the situation was. Lala gave her permission to tell her story without hesitation, hoping that after hearing it, the young man would lose interest. The Marquise briefly recounts that Lala fled Volcano from her debt-ridden husband, who beat her. She also adds that her granddaughter wanted the fugitive to become her assistant, but Delma immediately said she didn't need that. The girl clutches her skirt with her fingers. She already understands that it cannot be said that the Marquise can handle everything herself, and even if Rachel and her family will feel calmer, even if she is just there, the young noblewoman is not going to sit around and do nothing. Therefore, she thinks deeply about what to do now. Lord Manchefel looks at the young lady from under his eyelashes, saying that the story is indeed very sad. Then he suggested that if the Marquise had no work for her, she could stay at the Manchefel family home. The girl frowns, involuntarily comparing herself to a homeless cat looking for a home. Of course, she thinks about how Leon is probably quite wealthy and lives in a nice house where she won't have to worry about her and her brother's safety. But she came here specifically to become the Marquise's assistant. Delma supports the guest, saying that if Lala wants to, she can leave with the Lord. The girl jumps up, trying to object, but she stops mid-sentence when she meets the Marquise's stern, yet slightly sad gaze. From this, Lala decides that she is being sent away. She thought that if she showed her worth, the mistress of the house would understand how much she needed her. But she blushes involuntarily, realizing how arrogant that is. The girl asks quietly if she is causing the Marquise any inconvenience. The Marquise replied indignantly that she had never said such a thing. So Lala begged her to give her a chance to prove herself and show that she was useful. She even bows to her. Delma, surprised by this, said that an assistant is not obliged to go that far. And then she began to wonder why she was so attached to her. After all, working for Leon was no worse than working for her, and the fugitive would certainly be provided with a good life. But the girl cut her off, saying that she had come to Bynamir to serve her specifically, so as not to miss her last chance. She asked for a month first, and then just a week to prove herself. The woman closed her eyes and sighed. The Lord suddenly grinned. Then he laughed, saying that it was the first time he had seen someone more stubborn than Delma, and that the Marquise had lost after all. When asked by the hostess why this was so, the young man pointed out that no matter what Lala said, she clearly would not change her mind. At that moment, the girl was still frowning and nervous. Delma looked at her for a while, twirling a strand of hair, and then finally agrees. She added that since Lala was so confident in her usefulness, she would have to prove in practice. Lala beamed when she heard this and thanked the Marquise. After Lala sat back down, the woman asked what her son was doing today. Hearing about her son, the Lord was very surprised, almost horrified that the girl had run away with her son, but mostly because of the even greater complexity of such an undertaking. Leon's eyes showed clear sympathy, which did not escape Lala and surprised her. Now the knight understood why his tea partner's new assistant was so stubborn. She was doing everything for her son. The guy began to ask her about her name, age, and what the child was like, even though the former noblewoman answered with noticeable tension. The Lord also asked if anyone was looking after him. When he received a negative answer, he was indignant. In Binamir, children are always supervised until they reach the age of 10. This is all because of a legend about a witch who kidnaps children. Leon gets up, saying that he needs to go see the boy. Lala assures him that everything will be fine, but the knight refuses to believe that everything is fine when the child is alone. Then the girl states outright that her fairy, with whom she has a contract, is with him. This greatly surprises the guest, and Lala, not without pride, explains that even if they don't believe her, she has a contract with a spider fairy who will let her know if anything happens to Rin. Leon exhales with relief and sits down. Then he asks if Lala has considered sending the boy to the academy. But Lala replies that he is currently doing exercises that she has compiled herself. Lord is impressed that she is doing this, calling her a true scholar. So Lala explains that she compiled all the assignments with the help of reference books. However, due to her limited abilities, she admits that she plans to hire a maid or tutor for Rin as soon as she settles in. After all, as a responsible adult, she must protect and guide Rin. In addition, she must thank the Marquise for taking them in. Manchufel also asks if she worries about her son when he is not around. Lala agrees. But before she can finish, the guest suggests that the boy study inside the mansion, then turns to the Marquise and asks her opinion. Without hesitation, the woman agrees with her young friend, asking her assistant to bring her son to her, explaining that even though the fairy is watching over him, there is no guarantee of his complete safety. Lala thanked the hostess, blushing slightly. Leon immediately took out his pocket watch and, glancing at the time, announced that it was time for him to leave. He got up and walked to the greenhouse exit, saying goodbye to Delma. Instead of saying goodbye in return, she sighed and said that he didn't have to come to her, but the boy parried with the words that if he didn't come, the Marquise would be bored. The woman chose not to continue the argument and asked Lala to accompany Leon, which she willingly did. After all, it was a chance for her to prove herself as a good assistant. For a while, the young people walked silently down the corridor, until, at some point, the Lord asked to call his assistant simply by her name, allowing her to address him in the same way. But the girl did not agree to this and asked to be called Madame Dosa. The guy smiled. He called her very cute, ignoring her previous words, and called her Lala anyway. She looked at him in surprise at first, but then she skeptically covered her eyes and frowned, saying that she wasn't sure that was how a married woman should be described. They continue walking, and Leon immediately compares his companion to a wary cat, which makes the girl freeze. Leon began to explain how nursing cats behave a little aggressively towards everyone except their kittens, so he admits to being charmed by her when he learns that Lala is a mother cat. The knight is again indignant at the man who could treat her that way. Meanwhile, Lala quickly headed for the exit and opened the door. She asked the Lord to walk the rest of the way alone, and when he says slyly that he will only leave when his assistant calls him by name, Lala gives him a very dissatisfied look. Then Leon leans toward her ear, agreeing to leave after all, apologizing for teasing her, and then waves goodbye. After Lala returned to the greenhouse, the Marquis had to apologize for his guest's behavior. Of course, she was unhappy that the guy continued his advances even after learning about Lala's marriage. But the woman assures her assistant that, even if it's hard to believe, he is a very serious person with a good reputation in society. She adds that His Highness Prince Godrobe promoted Leon to captain of the royal guard for his merits. But Madame Dosa already knew all this from Rachel's stories. Prince Godrobe is the king's younger brother, responsible for foreign policy, an exceptional personality who maintains neutrality at court. And Lord Manchufel has high authority among the knights and many envious people. So Lala wondered, should it be this way? The Marquise, rather to herself, asked if he had really turned 26 this year. She tells her assistant that she has sent him lists of marriage candidates several times, but he immediately sent them back. And Lala was sure that he flirts with all women like that. Based on this, Delma cannot help but note that this is the first time the guy has shown such interest in someone, so she suggests that the girl consider his candidacy if she wants to remarry. Lala looks a little gloomy, but agrees. However, the Marquise adds that Lala has nothing to offer the Lord at the moment, as she now resembles a stray cat, embarrassing the young lady even more with this comparison. The Marquise also says that she will have to send someone to Volcano if she wants to divorce her current husband. The girl asks why the mistress of the mansion is thinking so far ahead. Delma replies that at her age, it is enough to look at a person to understand what they are like. And in his eyes, she sees sincerity. Her expression softened, which made Lala slightly embarrassed. And the Marquise said that she considered her to be the woman she could trust with Leon. Such words made Lala think that there was some kind of deep connection between the two, because no one would choose a bride for a simple tea partner. Although, the Marquise admits that she cannot understand Lala's stubbornness. When her assistant apologized, Delma told her not to apologize because thanks to this she could now see her determination and it helped her get to know Lala better. So she was even glad that Leon had come. Lala calls the Marquise, who recalls their previous conversation and asks the girl to bring her son to her before starting work. The assistant does so. The boy who arrives greets the woman and introduces himself. But as he was saying how happy he was to meet her, all the papers, notebooks, and books suddenly fell out of his hands. While mother and son fussed about trying to pick everything up, the Marquise first opened her eyes in surprise, but then smiled softly, giggling quietly. However, she immediately disguised her laughter as a cough, ordering them to gather everything up quickly, although at that moment both new residents of the mansion had already dealt with this minor mishap. While Delma was still turned away, pretending to be unhappy with her eyes closed, Lala approached her, asking her permission to introduce the person sitting on her folded arms. She held out her palms, showing the mistress of the house Gakken, introducing her as the very spider fairy with whom they had a contract. The Marquise looks at the white lump in amazement, noting that it is quite cute for a spider, and the girl thanks her for the compliment. Lala also adds that Gakken will patrol the mansion's surroundings, to which Falkenhayn simply asks her not to exhaust the creature too much. Agreeing, Lala gets to work. To begin with, she decides to check whether the rooms are sufficiently furnished. As the Marquise's assistant, she has been entrusted with the keys to the mansion and can contact merchants to order the necessary items. She also thought it necessary to get to know the servants, confident that everyone should be in place today. But just as Lala thought this, a maid came around the corner carrying a large pile of things and bumped into her. The maid cried out, asking the stranger who she was. Madame Dosa apologized and bowed slightly to introduce herself. The maid calmed down a little and said that Mrs. Rachel had told them about her, then introduced herself as Rosa and the second maid who had just arrived, Annie. Rosa asked not to tell Lloyd about what had happened. Two more men appeared behind them. The one in chef's clothes smiled good-naturedly and said that they had heard voices in the hallway, while the second servant remained serious. The cook introduced himself as Tony, and the other man introduced himself as Lloyd, whom Rosa had mentioned earlier. He served as secretary and butler. He also apologized for the maid's behavior, as did the girl herself. Lala smiled sweetly and said she was happy to meet everyone. After a while, as they approached the greenhouse, they could hear muffled voices and occasional laughter. Lala asked permission to enter. She then approached the tea table. When the Marquise asked what had happened, the assistant replied that she had inspected all the rooms, including those for the staff, and had found almost no cosmetics, bath salts, or scented oils anywhere. The Marquise said that at her age, such things were no longer used. But Lala objected, saying that such things were necessary for any lady. After all, when she wears beautiful clothes and makeup, she unconsciously holds her back proudly. Moreover, one must not forget to take care of oneself, as a good bath helps to relax. According to Lala, Rin taught her all this. She looks at her son, and he nods affirmatively, almost glowing with kindness. The boy says that his mother always looked like a princess at balls, and even now he is happy when he looks at her. Madame Dosa, having received the necessary support from her son, says that it may seem intrusive, but Delma should not say that it is unnecessary. A slight half-smile touches the woman's lips, and yet she agreed, asking her assistant to take care of it. The Mendoza family heirs were very pleased with the Marquise's decision. The sun was gradually setting behind the mountains. When dinner was ready, Tony thanked Lala for her help, as he had finished faster than usual, and the girl replied that she was happy to help. Rosa rushes into the kitchen, having just been looking for Madame Dosa. When asked what happened, the maid says that the Marquise wants to have dinner with her and her son. Lala is surprised by her boss's request, but the maid enthusiastically notes that this is a good sign and tries to find out how the new assistant managed to melt the noblewoman's heart. After all, she is like an impregnable fortress. The girl replied that the Marquise likes her son more than her. After all, Rin spent the whole day with her. But Rosa declares that this is the first time the mistress of the mansion has invited anyone other than Irma to her table. She adds that since the death of her granddaughter on her son's side, The Marquise seems very lonely. But then, realizing that she had said too much, she cried out, frightening both the maid and the cook. All because Mr. Lloyd had strictly forbidden anyone to talk about Irma. So Lala understood that after her death, mentioning her name was taboo. The girl assures the maid that she will not say anything, receiving her gratitude. Calming down, Rosa said that Rin was already waiting for Madame Dosa in the dining room, and that the servants would take care of setting the table and serving the food themselves. She also took the apron from the assistant. Approaching the dining room, Lala heard Rin telling the Marquise about her and her mother's trip on the ship. Peeking into the room, she saw how sweetly the boy was talking to the mistress of the mansion, almost glowing again. And Lala couldn't help but notice that Delma looked much softer than before, and even though Run was her brother, his abilities sometimes frightened her. The boy turned around, noticing his guardian, and smiled broadly. He said that the Marquise had invited them to have dinner together, for which the girl thanked her. Delma smiled slightly, saying that Tony is a very good cook and that her guests should feel free to eat their fill, wishing them bon appetit. After dark, Graciela and Gakin were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, as the day was finally over. They had done a good job. Then she looks at Florenci, who is already asleep, realizing that this child has simply saved her. The girl was afraid that her brother would find it difficult to adapt to his new life, but he was coping better than she was. Only now she has to earn the Marquise's respect herself, without relying on Ren's charm. But while things are more or less clear with Delma, she doesn't know what to do about one person. Lord Manchefel, lying in bed next to her brother, the girl thinks that she did the right thing by choosing the image of a married woman, because now the mistress of the house will not offer her candidates for marriage. But she didn't think Leon would be so interested in her. Lala would have understood if the young man saw her as a comfortable friend with whom he could be informal, but he called her sweet. Even Antony didn't call his former fiancée that. Although the young lady had always been harsh, the Lord's way of thinking was obviously different from the norm. Because of this, Graciela did not understand his actions and words. But very quickly, the girl decides to stop thinking about him, as she must concentrate on ensuring a bright future for her brother. This was Lady Mendoza's first meeting with Leon von Manchefel, and at that time, she could not have imagined that she would be drawn into a conflict involving him. At that moment, somewhere in the dark waters surrounded by wild grasses, a lone leather flask bobbed up and down. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.